Yes. Lightning Reed. A, plant that exists. Okay, with the previous plants, I tend to have strong emotions. I really like spikeweed, and I really don't like intensive carrot. For lightning reed, I think it's fine. It does its job as a plant well. This may come as a surprise, though, as most people think very strongly about lightning reed and tend to be on the extremes. Some people love this guy for his obscene power and his capability to shred stages. Some people hate this guy for his obscenely low DPS, and how much people seem to believe it's good despite this. But hey, that's interesting, ain't it? The people who love Lightning Reed call it powerful. The people who hate Lightning Reed call it weak. It's almost as if, somehow, Lightning Reed is both overpowered and underpowered, simultaneously. Is that even possible? Well, the answer is a firm kinda. A very firm kinda. I'll need to explain his abilities to go over why this is. Before I do, I want to quickly mention that mods which significantly change Lightning Reed, Eclise Alpha, will be excluded from the majority of this discussion. Other mods like AltverZ and Nightcast have more conventional reads, so I'll stick to M, okay? Okay. Let's explain what the conventional read is then, eh? Lightning Reed is a reed that is made out of electricity. That's about it. I mean, I could bring up how thin it is. It's interesting how little space it actually takes up. Seriously, this thing is minuscule compared to even sunflowers. Beyond this, it's a very simple design visually. Not really wrong, but eh. Anyways, more mechanically, Lightning Reed is still simple. It fights the nearest zombie in the 3 adjacent lanes, those being its own and the one on top and on bottom. Whenever it fires one of these projectiles, they will then link to a nearby zombie in a 3x3 space, at total random. This will then link to a new zombie that hasn't already been targeted by the current chain in a 3x3 space, up to a maximum of 3 targets from one strike. These don't count as projectiles, so they can hit through a lot of things. They work more like Bong Choi's melee attack in terms of damage, which is neat but not important in the slightest, bar dealing with jesters. Also interestingly, Lightning Reed's damage output is very bad. It does half a piece damage per shot, in most cases, being basically the only plant to do less damage than a pea shooter. Lightning Reed is also specifically, and expressly, designed to take out chickens and chicken wranglers. It's good enough at this, but it's not actually too good. Generally, AoE such as Laser Beam or Fume Shroom is actually superior. Gotta love it. Anyways, to wrap up an extremely simple plant, its plant food ability spawns a cloud that will move around the screen dealing heavy single target damage. It can also target ice blocks, which I didn't know until making this video, which is neat, I think. It's a pretty decent plant food effect, especially for a plant like Lightning Reed, which struggles with high HP targets, but it's far from a major reason you'd ever actually use a plant like this. Mostly because single target plant foods have a really bad track record, but hey, it's fine enough here. Now that we've explained Reed for too long, I think it's time we get to the point of this video. How can a plant be overpowered and underpowered at the same time? This is a strange question to ask, but really, what makes a plant overpowered? Yes, it's typically associated with being stronger than the things around, but that's not really correct. Think about it this way. Is sunflower overpowered in Plants vs Zombies 1? It's a plant that produces sun, is always used, and always effective. It has competition too, Sunshroom, which is significantly worse in the daytime. Does this make sunflower overpowered? No, of course not. Sunflower isn't overpowered because a plant being overpowered isn't a matter of it being good or bad. It's a matter of how it fits into the game. A plant is overpowered if its power specifically causes an issue with the game. But because of this, some plants may end up being overpowered despite being much weaker than you'd think, as some plants end up being underpowered despite being very strong or the like. And this in general, is where Lightning Reed begins. When using Lightning Reed, you aren't using one Lightning Reed, you're using 20. And 20 Lightning Reeds are either broken or incredibly weak because of their abilities. A swarm of Reed can wreck everything in sight or lose before the thing gets set up. This is due to its incredibly spammable nature, and its abilities are totally win or lose. When you use Lightning Reed, you're going all in on Reed and hoping its traits are enough. Now, let's explain what I mean by this. Lightning Reed is an insanely easy plant to use. It's multi-lane and attacks whatever is closest. Its attacks arc automatically across multiple lanes. Placing Lightning Reed, as a result, adds damage to the field rather than a single lane. It's cheap too, so you will just keep placing them, and knowing when to place them simply isn't a factor. There is no real skill to using Lightning Reed when compared to so many other plants. This means two key things. 1. It's hard to see the Lightning Reed when it's at its worst, as for the most part it'll be working at its best. 2. Regardless of the player's own skill, the Lightning Reed will be very effective. Now, this isn't to say that everyone who likes Lightning Reed is simply bad at the game. However, what I am saying is that people who consider Lightning Reed overpowered are, in fact, justified. Because Lightning Reed is always playing at its best, while other plants which are also overpowered may often not be. Lightning Reed doesn't require support from instances to do its thing. It's already incredibly strong enough, which is good because Reed's stats are awful. Consistently. Lightning Reed is not a powerful attacker. It's an easy to use attacker, and this creates something super interesting, because fundamentally, Lightning Reed isn't a powerful plant. Its single target damage per second is abysmal, its AoE damage is inconsistent at best and not particularly high. In vanilla, plants like Laser just straight up outclass it, in theory. In other words, Lightning Reed is incredibly weak if you know how to play PvZ well, because these traits that it has which makes it powerful just don't really apply anymore. When I say that Lightning Reed is both overpowered and underpowered, this is what I mean. This is also why in mods, Lightning Reed doesn't get used much at all. Most people who play mods are very skilled at the game, or at least above average, and so Lightning Reed just isn't a good pick. Despite restats often being very similar to vanillas, it's just not worthwhile to bring often, so often people just won't. It also doesn't help that most mods struggle to find a balance for Lightning Reed. It's practically imbalanceable, so most mods will leave it being extra weak, as a strong enough lightning suffers from the vanilla issues, being so generic yet so effective, but becomes an easy pick for people who really should be using more complex plants. Not saying that this is a huge issue in Plant vs Zombies 2, though. In reality, Plant vs Zombies 2 is a fairly simple game compared to how complex mods tend to get, and so spamming Lightning Reed isn't nearly as much a problem. It's also why I don't consider Reed a badly designed plant. I just find how its design works super interesting. Though it also isn't the only plant that works this way. Actually, it's just a poster child for a bigger issue. One of the most well-known PvZ2 modding decisions regards a plant called Strawburst in Eclise Beta. You see, it was bugged for a very long time to recharge its shots a lot faster than intended, on top of already having incredible firepower even as intended. Yet, nobody noticed it. In fact, it was probably one of the least used plants in the entire mod. Why was that? Was it secretly bad? No, not particularly. The people who really used it found an insanely effective plant awaiting them. It completely tore apart hordes, and people did generally agree it was effective. Then why was it so unused? Well, you can probably guess. We've touched on this already. It was too hard to use. Strawburst is a manual plant that has a habit of dying horribly to everything. It's also, in Eclise, a very heavy plant, and doesn't deal with a lot of heavy enemies all too well. It requires specific support to function effectively, and so it ended up being fairly tricky to use. You can see where this is going. In the same way that Lightning Reed goes super far into being easy to use despite its low strength, Strawburst did the opposite, requiring a large amount of skill and precision to use. it's not necessarily the only plant like this either. Bowling bulb and tile turnip are both plants that universally require a lot of skill and a lot of effort to make work, but often have very effective abilities that are very worthwhile, resulting in them being very in use and often considered straight up awful, despite being more effective than you may think. Honestly, a video on tile turnip would be super fun to do. But y'all be interested in that? Let me know. I've literally only just realized this is a plant I could do a video on. Ha. Anyways, this is such a difficult thing to look at, and I think results in some of the most complicated elements of rating Plants vs Zombies plants in general. Because here's the thing, nobody cares that Starfruit is a top tier plant in Plant vs Zombies 1. They just care about what they use to win, and they are totally, 100% correct to do so. And therefore, I personally believe that we've got an issue on our hands if we wish to judge a plant by its strengths, power, and weaknesses. The Lightning Reader is a perfect example. Again, it's barely good enough. But it is good enough, and it gets results. I can't exactly call a plant like this bad. Even if by stats, it's utterly worthless. This is also why Plant vs Zombies balancing is utterly impossible. You can't make every plant useful when players have no reason to experiment. They have no reason to use any of the plants you may want them to, no matter how powerful they may be. All making plants stronger does is ensure that the people who use them will be even more effective than they already are. It's a nightmare scenario. In case you're curious, yeah, this is an issue in mods too. It often results in people playing in boring ways, so you have to cut their options more often than I'd like in order to force them to play in interesting ways. It's sort of a major issue with PvZ as a franchise. There is no need for perfection, and playing perfection doesn't work well with the series, so you don't exactly end up with a lot of reason to experiment, which I consider an issue. To return to general discussion briefly, though, the ease of use against effectiveness thing is a very tricky tightrope to walk. It's an unsolvable issue within the scope of pure stats, hence why most solutions are in fact in the realm of Arena. While I don't like Arena, I think Arena is a step in the correct direction to make hard-to-use plans feel more reasonable. Unfortunately, they proceeded to break Arena by making plants, good. Really, really good. But what can you do? I'd say the best solution would be a version of Arena where your total points result in a total score or the like. Maybe you have to beat 5 levels, and your score on each would add up to a final total, giving you a bunch of rewards for it. I really don't know, I'm just throwing out suggestions that sound like they could help. Regardless, it ain't gonna work in Vanilla's quote-unquote balancing, so it probably doesn't matter anyways. I suppose all that's left to really cover is modded reads more precisely, I suppose. Most of what I already said applies, though I can more specifically cover Alpha Read now, which is nice. All the gang's finally here. Woo. I'm going to start with Eclise Alpha's read as it's too difficult to clump. It has 70 seconds long recharge, which is the same as Cherry Bomb in that mod for context. It can be placed over other plants, appearing to sit beside them when it does so, and does decent-ish damage, I suppose. It's also got different range, being able to target any lane but only 5 SO columns ahead of it, and only cost 75 sun, which, especially by Eclise standards, is very cheap. It's certainly better than it sounds, but that's hardly a surprise. It sounds useless. And it honestly mostly is compared to the plants, mostly because that recharge is too much for a plant that costs 75 sun. But it has its place as a weak splasher if you are running heavy single target, I suppose. They could just also run Spikeweed or something instead. I am not biased. Nightcast Read is a fairly simple affair in comparison. Functionally having equal stats to Vanilla Read, except for being worse against chickens. I don't know why that's a thing. Ironically, this means it's a lot stronger comparative to the plants around it, which is interesting, I suppose. The only thing noteworthy is the optional change of stats to make it cost 200 sun, reassigning its damage to be firing faster for less damage, and to make it pierce 10 zombies maximum. Often this will be more than enough to hit a vast majority of zombies on the screen, and as a result you end up spending 200 sun to deal about half P DPS to the entire field. It's honestly really broken, just wow. Admittedly, I didn't test it too extensively, but it does seriously seem obscenely powerful, so if anybody watching this works on Nightcast, which I know do, then maybe look into them, because I'm honestly concerned it may be too effective. Anywho, moving on, we have Into Storm's Lightning Reed. Into Storm in general has some of the most ludicrous difficulty swings of any mod I've ever played, and that certainly applies to Lightning Reed. Very good in earlier worlds, and only middling to poor in later worlds. In terms of stats, it seems to be vanilla, but it costs 175 sun, so it's not exactly got a whole lot going for it. Still, I did manage to beat at least one pretty hard level, and the other I only lost due to Explode not being literally useless. It's definitely better than I gave credit to initially when I played, and has some stuff going for it, though that's just multi-lane being overpowered. Mostly. Finally, and not least, is Alternate Universes, shown to AltverZ's Lightning Reed. Unlike the others shown in this video, it's actually downsized, meaning it deals a lot less damage than other reeds, but costs 75 sun. This may seem significant, but it's really not. It's mostly just better for the early game really, and that's the only real change in using it. However, I found myself really enjoying AltverZ Lightning Reed. I don't know, I might just enjoy low sun cost strats or something. Seriously, I enjoy having a good solid 5 sunfloods of defense, and Lightning Reed is a very darn good plan for sustaining it. Beyond that, it plays pretty well and doesn't seem too broken or anything. Like, it's so light that it needs a ton of support at all stages. Still doesn't use much for that reason though, I think, as it needs a bit more support than people tend to give, beyond the usual reasons people don't use plans like Reed. And thus is the key history of Lightning Reed. It also exists in Shallow, but shh. Anyways, I find it interesting that it really does just go all along the spectrum, and then exists in Eclise Alpha. Anyways, I should note that most modded Lightning Reeds tend to be plans that are used very rarely, and when it's used often, there's usually a big enough concern that it's becoming too powerful, at least reasonably to me. I guess in general, if good players using Reed, there's a problem, I suppose. Reed is super interesting, for basically every reason that isn't Lightning Reed. It's certainly an oddball plant, and a plant I am truly, utterly neutral on. But hey, can't feel strongly about all plants, am I right? Though honestly, I think I've likened up to Reed a little bit. I don't know, it's definitely not a plant I'll go to all the time, but I found using it interesting enough. Seems a good way to practice insta management, if nothing else, which makes it not impossible to work with and not impossible to provide some interest. It's definitely not my top plants, but it's grown on me a bit, what can I say? Anyways, I've talked enough about the recent channel explosion, so instead I'm going to say that I have a Discord set up now. This will be where I'll be talking about future projects for this channel, and otherwise just muck around in, because why not? I'm also starting work on a new modding project, which I have shown before, which I will likely discuss there, so yeah, that's neat. Otherwise, I feel like bringing back a super oldie, so this has been Creeps, and have a good one.